Hello and welcome. I am Stacey Thomas, author, ALS advocate, film producer, and talk show host. I'm here to motivate, educate, and entertain. Join me on YouTube every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Stacey Thomas Talk Show, where we have powerful discussions centered around health, relationship, careers, and everyday conversation. Follow me on Facebook, I am Stacey Thomas, on Instagram, Stacey Thomas Talk Show. And don't forget, I can promote you too. Email me at iamstaceythomas@gmail.com. Now, it's time for the show. Hello, everybody. I am Stacey Thomas, unrestricted, unlimited. I always say that simply because it's my brand and I feel like God gave it to me. And it simply means don't put me in a box. I have yet to see all that God has for me. And I get very excited, in case you're new watching, I get very excited when I get new guests on the show because I always feel like God connects me to people that that's going to bless my viewers, right? Not just bless me, but bless my viewers. And tonight's guest, very interesting man. I want to tell you a little bit about him. I won't say too much because I can't sell anybody else. They've got to sell themselves, right? So just to start off, Andrew Johnson is a podcaster. He has military experience. He has experience working in the prison. I'll let him come on and tell you more, but we're about to hear some interesting things from this gentleman. Hey, Andrew.
Good evening. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I can't ask for more. It's been a pretty good day for me.
Pretty good day. Pretty good day,
Definitely.
you said?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
You know,
I'm
and
on here with you, so it's a good day.
well, let me say thank you for agreeing to come on my show. I saw you with Ellen Suttereth. I watched some shows and I'm like, who's this man? Why haven't I seen this interested man before? So thank you.
Absolutely.
So, Andrew, I'd just like to give you the opportunity to start off. I could have read your bio, but I feel like we should just hear it from you. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get to your podcast.
Absolutely. My name is Andrew Johnson. I was born and raised in New York, and like Stacy mentioned earlier, I was went in the military, and I was in the active duty military for 7 years, and then I went to the reserves. And I did another, I can't even remember, maybe 15 more reserve years. I can't even remember. But anyway, it was over 20 years of total service. But during that period of time, I also worked in a prison setting. So for a majority of my prison career, which was almost about 27 years, I dealt with counseling, both male and female offenders, and primarily in substance abuse counseling. But I also had to do mental health and a few other things as well. And the advantage was to that particular job. Obviously, it's rewarding when you see success and progress. But the advantage was I was able to collect a lot of unofficial data about a variety of different things, such as relationships, some of the stories that they had, and some of the lives that they had led. And I always say, Stacy, that when you are in a prison setting, it's sort of in a strange way a microcosm of society. It's just in there, it's sort of on steroids. So they might do things a lot more extreme than we do it, but it's sort of the same things. So I started to collect a lot of this data, especially when it came to relationships and some of the things that they had been through. And then I started to notice, the last maybe 2 or 3 years before I retired, I started to notice that some of the things that I was hearing them say out, that the inmates were saying, I start to see out here in our communities. And so I says, I should probably, with the information that I have, maybe use it toward in a podcast forum. Now, initially, when I started all of that, it was based upon I wanted to just sort of leave a blueprint for my children, so that because once you record something, it's basically there for essentially forever. So I wanted them to have something just in case, I didn't, you never know when your time runs out. So I wanted to have something there for them, but it turned into something else. And I sort of became, in a weird way, a lot of people, especially, the inmate population, I was noticing that I was becoming sort of like a relationship mentor. And I didn't want to be that. But they were asking me these questions, and I started to give them answers to it, and they were very receptive to the answers that I was giving them. So I says, maybe, and now I'm doing this podcast. I'm sort of doing the same thing. Usually I'll have a guest on. Sometimes I'll have, I do an episode by myself. But it's sort of the same thing. It's just I'm doing it in a podcast form.
That's interesting because I was wondering to myself, the topics that you have on your show, I was wondering, hey, was he inspired by someone? Is this based on his own experiences? Maybe he's went through the bad relationship thing and now he wants to talk about it. Did he study relationships in school? But you're saying that it came from observing and finding yourself answering questions that others they appreciated what you were telling them.
That's correct. It was more like, now, to be honest with you, Stacey, some of it was also my own personal experiences in the journey through relationships, but it was the information that I was giving the inmates. I noticed that they were, when I say receptive to it, they wanted to know more, and they wanted. And so, as I started to implement in the group setting, when I would do groups with them, I had one block that I taught was just on relationships. And so I did that for like 5 years on just relationships, whether they're friends or intimate or whatever. And that's where I get collected a lot of this data from.
So while you're in there and you're coaching people or you're speaking to people about relationships, right? I'm sure that was a benefit for them, but were the men that were asking the questions, were they using this class or participating in this class because they wanted to be better men, or do you think it was just to pass time?
That's a good question. Well, what I can tell you is that there were some incentives for the inmates to take the classes, but what they got out of them far outweighed the incentive. So generally, we had different programs, but they would get a certain amount of time where they would have to be in the program itself. And the advantage for us was that we could take them through different stages, and we could show them different things. And you could see, honestly speaking, Stacey, you could see at certain points throughout the program, when they say the light bulb came on, you could see it, in their faces. And they would say that, after I got to this point, that's when I realized that, the stuff I had been doing, the stuff I was told, it didn't make any sense. And this, sort of made a little bit more, it was more logical to them. And another thing too, when you're dealing with males and you're talking about relationships, they open up a little bit more to another male staff than they would per se a female staff, because they don't want to be perceived as something else. So they don't want to say something that might be inappropriate. They might, close down a little bit. With me, I gave them the floor and I said, tell me your story, share it with us so we can, learn from each other. And while
Wow.
you're teaching, Stacey, it's so funny, while you're showing them going through the stuff, you're also learning about yourself as well. So as we would go through certain things, I was like, man, you know what, man, I did that at one point. But you start to think like that. So that's why I say it was very rewarding. I would say that it was very rewarding. And so that was the advantage for me, is that while teaching them, I was also learning. And so I became this sort of reluctant relationship mentor is the best way I could describe it.
So, Andrew, another question as far as like dealing with the men that were behind bars. I'm not sure if you noticed this or not, but did you find that a lot of men that was receptive to what you're saying wanted to hear what you were saying? Were they men that came from homes that didn't have father figures?
Majority of the inmates that I had contact with, and I had contact with all kind of inmates, but majority of them did not. They were from fatherless homes.
Fatherless homes.
Yes, and I had. It was so funny because once some of them like would graduate and everything, and they'd be getting ready to go home, they would write me a letter or something, and they would just simply say, "You're the closest thing to a dad I had." And
Wow.
I had some who never had a job, and I showed them how to do it, fill out an application. I showed them how to go on a job interview. They said, no one's ever taught me that.
Wow.
So it was a lot of first time things that me and you we take for granted, but them, this was a lot of firsts. So when they saw me, my complexion, me walking in there, and they could tell, that I had shared some similarities with them. They opened up a lot more, and that's what I liked about the job. It was rewarding because of that. With the females, you don't really have to do much with them. They're going to start talking anyway.
Yeah,
So
yes.
with them, working with them, it was almost like I just had to just keep them in bounds, so they didn't go on tangents and
Uh,
start talking about other things. I just had to keep them in the lane, and
right.
they were good. They would go.
Yeah, women are going to talk.
Yes,
Women are going to talk. Women really appreciate it when a man is speaking, because women want to know what men are thinking. Me and my girlfriend could talk all day long about what we think this man is thinking, but it's something about when you have a male there that speaks and speaks openly. So that's a great thing. Angela, hello, Angela. Angela is someone that has a talk show. Out. She's down in North Carolina. I wouldn't be surprised if Angela does not try to connect with you. She's an
great.
awesome individual. Patrice Shuford. Hello, sweetheart. She says, wow, sad. That's among the African Americans. Continue to pour into them. Was it ever draining for you, Andrew?
That's a good question, Stacy. It didn't get draining to me. I didn't really experience burnout until near the end.
Till the
And
end?
like when I got to about say year 25, 26, I started to get that feeling like it's time to go. Like I felt like I had accomplished as much as I could accomplish. And you're talking. I've had the amount of inmates I had been in contact with were in the thousands. So
Wow.
so I felt like I could have stayed on longer, but I felt like I what I needed to accomplish, I sort of accomplished. And my goal was that the the offenders, both the males and the females, that they really got something from my presence, was showing them certain things that they didn't know or didn't have any experience with in the past. So the last year or two, to answer to that question, that last year or two, I started getting the itch where I was saying, you know what, it might be time to go.
Yeah, because, and I asked that because I know a lot of times, no matter how much we try to help people or counsel people, it's the same like with me, what I do at my job. You're so busy pouring into others that sometimes, and you don't mind blessing others and you don't mind pouring into others, but at times it'll drain you, and by the time you get home, you've got very little to give to the people in your house. That's why I asked.
That's a good question, and that's absolutely true, by the way, because there were times when I would come home and I would sort of you know shelter myself a little bit, where I would go in the bedroom and do everything in there. And I had to have a conversation with my family, explain to them why some of these things were happening. And when you're in that setting, it's noisy all day. You're around about a lot of noise. So when you come home, you kind of want quiet. So that's the dynamic. And that's what I started. Like I said, I was ready to leave, just simply because I didn't want any. For one, I didn't want it to affect my family, but two, if I'm experiencing burnout, I feel like I wouldn't be giving them 100%.
Right.
So I didn't want to do a job and give 50, 60% when I was giving 100 at one point.
Right. So Angela is making a statement, and I'd like
Mhm.
to respond to that and have you respond to that. Angela says, but women have to let A woman has to let her man know it's a safe space to speak into. I agree with that, Angela, but I believe what Andrew said a few minutes ago, that men, even, I believe being my man's best friend is a great thing. I believe that the space I create, letting him know he can talk to me, is a great thing. But it's still, when it comes down to it, I believe, like Andrew said, a man is going to be more open with another man. What do you say, Andrew?
I agree with that. There was a point when I first got down there and I was doing the counseling, that they were going to give the relationship group to a female, and I just said, I don't think that, I think I'm gonna have to do this. And I spoke to my supervisor at the time. I said it would just make more sense. I said the inmates will open up more as I go, with me versus the female, just simply because they're going to be a little less reluctant to speak to her about some of the intimate stories or things that they may have to share. Because
Right.
there's some things with male intimacy, is it almost has to be spoken around other males. It's very difficult for them to say certain things around a female professional, so someone that's in the field itself. So they won't give them you can't get the full dose. And I feel like if they can't be transparent and I can't be transparent with them, we can't heal them. Because we're not curing everything, but we're healing. I call myself, and I don't want to make this sound arrogant or anything, but I would say, I felt like when it came to relationships, and I didn't want this to be the case, trust me, I felt like I was almost like a surgeon to an extent, because they didn't have, there was a lot of information they didn't have, and that I was just explaining them how to treat women. I mean, coming from their environments and their backgrounds, they only know what they see. And a lot of boys, they learn through imitation. So if they see a bunch of guys that's in their neighborhood having a bunch of children with a bunch of different women, they copy and emulate that behavior. So
That's
I had to explain to them. One of the things I would always tell them is, like, when you have a baby with this woman, that's a permanent thing. You're with her forever, even if you're not together no more.
that's right.
And
That's right.
so they would I make them think about those things, because they would always talk about my baby mama. She's this, she's that, and the other. I say, that's the thing. You have to be careful, because this is what you sign up for when you do that. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow. And before I get into showing people why they should follow your podcast, why they should listen to your podcast, you said something earlier. I want to ask this before I show a clip of one of your shows. Andrew, you said that you learned some things too. Can you tell us one thing that by helping others that you actually learned to use in your own relationship?
Yes. The one thing that I can honestly say is communication, as far as assertive communication. Sometimes I would come off aggressive in relationships. One thing that I always said is, if you're in a relationship, a long-term relationship with a woman or a marriage, never have an argument. Have a debate,
Right.
because a debate, you're trying to solve a problem. An argument, you're trying to win. And you shouldn't try to win with the person that you're with. If you're married to someone, and Stacey, I'll put it like this: if you're married to someone, essentially two people are becoming one. So if arguing, you're arguing essentially with a part of yourself, because that person, everything that you do affects that other person. So you have to be very careful how you speak to them. You have to be very, cognizant of your behaviors. And so I learned how to be a better assertive communicator. So I was more direct, firm, but I wouldn't trap people in corners and make them feel alienated. I want to give them room to express their opinion or feelings, even if I might think that it's wrong. So that's probably the one thing I learned that I could say that I took out and carried with me into present day.
Wow. So, ladies, if you're for the ladies that are on here, we don't want to argue. We don't necessarily have to win. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
We're going to debate because we're going to listen to what each other the other person has to say.
Right. Because you want, uh, if there's an issue on the table, we all both have a disagreement on how to deal with that issue, the ultimate goal is solving the problem. So it's a debate. You're saying your point, I'm saying my point. We're trying to reach some type of agreement or understanding. No one has to win. It's not a contest. This isn't a sport. This is, what, no one gets a prize at the end. So, we have to understand that we aren't trying to win. All of the relationships that I've spoken and interviewed couples who've been married 30, 40, 50 years. They said that if they argued or had any type of an argument, that it was very, very short, and they would apologize to each other. So very within that day. So they were that's to me is important. So that way you don't want to be in a situation where you're arguing and very upsetting, because if there's children in the home, they're going to feel it, and they're going to sense that something's wrong. And so as adults, it's our responsibility to not argue, it's to debate. And here's the thing, women want to win, they want to get the last word, and they want to say yes and that.
Yeah.
But that's just the nature of women. You don't want to always win the argument. But I always say to the women that I counsel is like, how do you feel after that? How do you feel after? Are you upset? Are you feeling a little bit of guilt, remorse, because you might have shamed a person and said some things that were, maybe below the belt? This is why I say it's not good to argue. It's okay to debate.
Look at you, Andrew, blessing the women watching this show and the woman hosting the show. So, Andrew, I can see right now, I'm going to want you to come back on this show, Andrew.
Oh, yeah. There's so much there's layers and layers of these topics.
So I'm going to play a clip.
Sure.
Well, Andrew, what's the name of the show?
Okay. The show is called The 313 Men, Money, and Marriage. If you put a space between that 3 and 13 when you type it up or do a Google search, it will automatically pop up. And we talk about the three things: men, money, and marriage. And the tagline for the show is, we just simply say where facts, logic, and reasoning are at the forefront of every conversation. And all I mean by when I make that statement is that this is going to be a left brain conversation. And when I make that statement, I'm basically saying that men spend the majority of their waking hours on the left side of their brain. That's the side where facts, logic, and reasoning lie. So it's just going to be a conversation based on a left brain, as we say, a left brain conversation. It doesn't mean that women can't participate. My audience is about 50-50, so women are very interested in what we have to say. And I've had licensed professional counselors who are women come on as guests. I've had relationship coaches come on who are women. So it's not an issue of, it doesn't mean that women can't be a part of it. It means that we're going to be looking at it sort of from a male point of view, if that makes any sense.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So I'm going to show a clip. You got so many interesting videos. And there's one, and we don't even have to talk about it, but there's one show you did, I believe, where the men in the church.
That's the recent one. Yeah, that we just did that one. That's the most recent one. Yes.
I've got to catch up. So let's take a look at this right here. Let me see.
So I always tell people, don't get caught up in all of those superficial things, those exterior things. If you're talking about a lifetime commitment, you have to start to look at the interior qualities of a person, not the things that you want, and just say, I want them to be this tall, I want to make this amount of money, I want them to have this. Those things doesn't matter if you're talking about a long lifetime commitment. In the moment, if you want something really, a short-term relationship, something like that, sure, if that's your preference, have at it. But in the long term, it's not going to be beneficial to you.
Andrew.
Yes.
Can you touch on that for us, please?
I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear it, but
that was the one you said, long-term preference. If that's what you want now, that's fine, but it had something to do with long term. Like, what do you see in a man? I guess basically I got out of that just because you want a tall man doesn't mean that the tall man is meant for you.
Oh, okay.
Is good
Yes.
for you.
This is one of my favorite topics when I talk about it on the show. I think I really believe, and women may agree or disagree with me. I think women are looking for the wrong things when they're talking about a long-term relationship. I think I really believe that if they focused on internal qualities of the man versus the external, a lot of times I've in the prison, I would do an exercise with the women, and I would tell them, I want you to put on that. I'm gonna give you a piece of paper, and I want you to put your top 5 wants that you want from a man. They put your top 5 wants, and they would list them, and they would write them down. They were enthusiastic about it. And I put them down there, and I say, okay, now I want you to cross off 2 of them. And so they would look at me like I was a little crazy, and they'd cross off the 2. And then I says, was everyone's done? They say, yes. I say, congratulations. And they look at me like I was crazy. I says, because that's your husband. Because you're going to get about 50 to 60% of what you want out of a long-term partner or spouse. Nobody gets 100. So the height, the money, all of those things, those are external factors. A lot of times, especially nowadays, Stacey, I don't know if you're aware of it or notice it or not. People, some women are wanting to get married for lifestyle. They're not marrying per se for love. And so,
Lifestyle.
right. And so that's why they're having such a difficult time, because they're all kind of chasing after that small group of men that can provide that lifestyle that they want. And where this comes from, I don't know. If you were to ask me, I'd probably say it might be reality TV, it could be social. I don't know. But what I'm saying is that it's throwing them off, because as they get older, they realize that that guy, they aren't going to get that guy, but they still want him, and so they're still looking, but they've wasted a lot of time. And the guys that did like them in the past, who might have been that 5'9" guy who had a halfway decent job, when they go back to look for him, he's already gone and married somebody else. So that's the danger. And I wish, I did 2 different shows. The second episode I ever recorded, and there's over 150 of them up there now, but the second one I ever recorded was called Your 20s. But I focused on that mostly on the men, because I says the 20s is a defining decade for a man. That's when all the things he does in that decade will essentially shape the rest of his life. Well, with women, the 20s is a defining decade for women, because who they pick, who they spend the most time with, who they decide to be in relationships with in their 20s will have an effect on them for the rest of their lives. So I always tell them they need to get that correct. And if they don't, it's not over, because a woman can still have some success in the dating market and get married to somebody in their 30s and even 40s. But that's the best opportunity for them, is in that 20s decade.
But I feel like, Andrew, when a woman's in her 20s, well, it could be a woman or a man, I almost feel like in our 20s, we really don't know what we want. We think we know what we want, but we really don't know what we want until later. So we have a tendency to make mistakes, like
Yes.
you just said, too busy looking on the outer side of the individual
Yes.
and not within them, right?
Yes.
And then, Andrew, and you don't have to talk about it, they can just go to your podcast and listen. I believe I saw something. You have an episode on basically, I'm gonna sum it up. I've got to go listen to it some more too. You want him to have all of this, but what are you bringing to the table?
Oh, something along. I'm not sure which one that one was titled, but yeah, it's when I say bring something to the table, I'm not talking about you have to have all these fancy things or anything.
Well, you didn't say, I'm sorry, you didn't say bring it to the table. That's what I got. Like, how do you want a man making $1 million and you're not making $1 million?
Right. Well, okay, yeah. It's not even as much about the money. It's like no different than anything that you do. If you invest in it, whether it's your time, money, or anything, you want something back of equal value. So I watch a lot of these dating shows sometimes. I just be casually glancing to them, and some of the women that have 3 and 4 children, and they're saying, I want the man to make $150,000 a year. I'm like, you're not going to get that guy. And it's not being mean or anything. It's just that, do you know who you're competing with for a man making $150,000 a year? You're competing with every woman, white, black, Hispanic. It's not, everybody's trying to get that guy.
Right.
So you have to sort of humble yourself. I did an episode, it's so funny. I did an episode a long time ago. I think it was last year. It was called Self-Awareness is the New Sexy. And I think if men and women were more self-aware and knew who they were, they would have a much better result out here in the dating market, because I think people have no idea who they are, and they end up dating what I call outside of their zone. And they spend way too much time there, and they miss out on husbands or wives.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow. Andrew, you know what? You got some interesting topics.
Oh yeah.
What are your expectations for the show? Like, where do you see yourself at? Where do you have your show, your podcast, right? Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you want to use what you're doing now to do something different or add on to it later on?
Well, there's a couple of things that I'm doing right now. I'm currently working on a book, but I have to get there's a lot of clearance type stuff I have to deal with what the book is going to be about pertaining to where I was working at and everything. And I have to wait a certain amount of time before I can even release it.
Okay.
But I'm working on that. I'm looking at doing something, a separate YouTube channel, because I have a YouTube channel that's affiliated with the podcast, and the YouTube channel is called the Men, Money, and Marriage Hour. And I'm gonna do stuff there, but I want to do something a little bit different where it's just gonna focus on the relationship stuff. So that's my plan in 2025, is to come up with a different channel where I'm calling myself sort of the relationship mentor, and do a show just like that, like a live or something along those lines.
And you said the YouTube is called the Men, Money,
and Marriage Hour. Yes.
Okay. So I know you have a show coming up, so I'm going to make this quick. Andrew, can you tell us one thing or two, if you'd like?
Sure.
Excuse me. What do you believe makes a marriage successful?
That's a good question. The first thing I mentioned already, debating versus arguing. I did a show on the money side of things, and when I was researching the show, one thing I found out was that if a married couple argues about money twice in a week, their chances of getting divorced go up about 40 to 50%.
Really?
So yes, it's very high if they argue about money. Money is like number one or number two leading cause of divorce. And so that's one of them, that I, would tell somebody, as far as live below your means is the best advice I can give people when it comes to money, because honestly, you're not going to believe this, but right now in our country, 60% of our population that's out here working, adults, cannot come up with $1,000 to repair something in their home. If something breaks, or their car breaks down, whatever, they literally would have to charge it or use a card or something along those lines. That's more than half the population. So we focus on the money side of things because we know that that's an indication of, can break up a marriage. The other thing, what I tell men, and see on my show, we're not red pill. We're telling men that they should get married. And the reason why we're telling them is because, number one, your chances of living into poverty when you're married go way, way down. So you're going to have, some money, when you're married to someone else. And the other thing is that you're going to live longer. There's a stat I quoted before about in the show, that men who are single and reaching age 65, only 60% of men who are single will reach age 65. Where if you're married, 90% will reach age 65. So I always tell people to, marriage it could mean, for some, literally it's a matter of life and death, because you're less likely you're not out in the streets or anything. You're less, prone to being in a violent situation because you're taking care of your home. And So it's a safe place for you if you pick the right one. I'll say this really quick. When it comes to picking a spouse, and I tell this for women and men, if
Okay.
you really want to get married to somebody, think of yourself as a trial judge, a trial lawyer, I'll say, a trial lawyer. You know, they say half the battle is picking the jury.
Right.
So if you pick the right jury, you're halfway there. Well, that applies in marriage. It's picking the right person, the right spouse. If you pick the right person, half the battle is already won. The other half you can work on and fix, but half that battle is already won by picking the right person. So I always tell men, we want beauty, we want the prettiest girl in the room type thing. I always tell men, when you're ready to get married or settle down, go down a notch in beauty for compatibility. And with women, I tell them, your checklist of wants, cross 2 of the 5 out, that's your husband.
That's your husband.
Yes, because you're not focusing on, women a lot of times like to focus on chemistry, but it's about compatibility as well. And the compatibility actually is more important than the actual quote unquote chemistry.
Andrew, but the chemistry feels so good.
Yes,
He's across the
yes.
room and I'm across the room.
You know, I make a joke on my show. I always say this. I always say 20 years ago, I might have been something to look at. Now I kind of look like a troll. But
Oh my goodness. Oh my
I say it
goodness.
in a joking manner, but I'm just saying beauty and looks fade.
That's
So,
right, Andrew. That's
so
right.
we're not going to look like we did 5, 10, 20 years ago. So we can't sit there and have that be the defining reason why we're going to be with somebody. That's why I say those internal qualities are actually a little bit more important than the external. It's the pretty girl gets in the club for free, but that doesn't guarantee that she's going to get married. So it's not a matter of looks. It's a matter of your character, who you are. Are you self-aware? Can you self-regulate yourself in a heated argument or debate? Can you do these things? Because that's going to determine whether or not your marriage survives. And so
Andrew.
that's the most important thing.
Andrew.
Yes.
Can you repeat the last thing you froze?
Oh, okay. I was just saying that in a relationship, self-regulation, meaning being able to control your anger, you know, in a heated argument or debate is, you know, that's paramount, you know. So the self-awareness factor is super, super important. You know, so I always tell people, just remember that, be self-aware, you know, make sure that you know, that, you know, the person that you pick isn't going to, you know, throw some curveballs at you, you know, and that's what the dating process is for. It's for to spot the red flags, you know, to make sure. You want to have more green flags than red ones. So that's the whole point of it, you know.
I think, you know, I know you're coming out with your book. Mm-hmm. I do. I think you need to come out with a journal for women.
That's interesting. Yeah.
At the top of each page, remind us, especially the ones that aren't married yet and the ones that are dating, remind those that are dating about your list to cross out too, and all other things that go with that. And for women like me that are married and we have a partner, remind us in the journal, keep your mouth shut, control your anger.
Yes.
To debate, do not argue.
Yes.
You got some good gems, Andrew. You got some good gems.
Thank you. Thank you.
Andrew, before you go,
yes,
please tell the audience how they can find you, how they can follow you. And I need to add something on the banner. The Men, Money, Marriage Hours on YouTube.
Yes.
But what is the link for the podcast?
Okay, the podcast is the 313 Men, Money, and Marriage. It's on all available platforms. So if you have an iPhone and you have Apple Podcasts, you can hear it there. Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music. It's on all of those platforms. If you have Spotify, you can watch the video version of it. because the Spotify releases it as a video episode. And if you want to see clips from the show, you can go to the Instagram page. It's called The 313 Men Money Marriage, all one word crammed together. And that's where you will see clips and pictures of previous guests who come on the show. So the Instagram page, you can also see some things there as well.
IG, I'm sorry, Andrew. IG's what again?
The 313 Men Money Marriage. And it's just like one word together. That's the IG. And you can see some clips and some pictures of past guests and different things like that. So it's the Instagram page is there. There's always in the show notes of every episode, there is a website, and it's a link. You just click on that link. If you want to contact the show for any reason, there's a contact button that you can push on once you go to the website, and you can just leave your name and email address and a message. If you want to be a guest, there's a contact form that you could fill out and just say, I want to be a guest on a show, or you want me to be a guest on another podcast, you can do that. And either way, that's how majority of people get in touch with me, get in contact with me.
Okay. Andrew, it's been great.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for blessing my platform, for blessing me and blessing my guests. And until next time, I'm wishing you the very best.
Absolutely. Anytime.
Have a great night, Andrew.
You too.
Thank you. Hey, look. Wasn't that good? Follow Andrew Johnson. Okay, you see it on the screen how you can follow him. Support him. He's giving great information. Hey, he's helping a lot of households, right? And thank you for watching. And as like I always say, don't stress too much about yesterday or worry too much about tomorrow, because if you do, you just might miss living today. I am Stacey Thomas. Have a great night.
Want to be heard? Get featured on The Stacey Thomas Show. Join Stacey for conversations on entertainment, books, and entrepreneurship. Don't miss out. Elevate your brand today. Book your interview now. Email staceythomas@gmail.com.